Hello students, welcome to the third lesson of the gender sensitization course, and today I am going to discuss about women in ancient India. Ancient India has been divided into four periods. You have the age of the Rig Veda 2500 to 1500, the age of the later Samhitas, Brahmanas, Upanishads from 1500 BC to 500 BCs. Then you have the age of the Sutras, epics and Smritis from 500 BC to 500, and then you have the age of the later Smritis, commentaries and digest writers from 500 AD to 1800. Though of course from 1100 we look upon it more as a medieval period. But one thing which is very clear about ancient India is that it is a patriarchal society. There is a lot of son preference in this society. This is driven by economic, religious, social and emotional preferences, and the expectations from both male and female became less desirable. We find that this was something which continued throughout this period. In fact, there is a prayer in the Atharveda. When the wife gets pregnant, both husband and wife go and pray to the sun god, and they say, "Oh God, grant us a son here and a daughter elsewhere." So, the birth of a daughter is not welcome. Even in the Samveda Maitra Brahmana, you have prayers for a male child. The husband prays along with his wife, "Unto thy womb let a fetus come, a male one, as an arrow to a quiver. Let a hero be born to you." And you have so many prayers throughout this period where they are praying for a male son, because the son becomes very important. The son is putra, one who protects you from put, that is hell. A father can throw all his debts on his son and he can obtain immortality. In fact, we find that there were so many prayers which are done for the birth of a son. You also have the Pumsavana Vrata, which is there, so that the child which is born is there are prayers in the Vishnu Smriti which says, "Through a son a father conquers the world, through a grandson he obtains immortality, and through a son's grandsons he obtains the world of the son." So therefore you have a lot of preference given to the boy. Even if you look at the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, there are so many sons in every family. If you look at the Mahabharata, the numbers, the girls are very few. In fact, the girl child is never part of any sacrifice or yajna in the family. And even when there is ancestor worship which is done, it is only boys who are involved. In fact, the Mahabharata says the son is the hope of the family and the daughter a source of trouble to it. So by and large, the girls are unwelcome in this period. In fact, there are so many prayers which are there. There are demons which cause miscarriages, and they are there are also some kind of a prayer where if the demon can convert a male fetus into a female fetus. And therefore we find that women are only valued if they give birth to a sons. It is a joint family which is predominant at this time. The wife plays a very important role. She is a Graha Patni. In fact, there is a marriage hymn in the Rig Veda which says, "May you be a Graha Patni," not just the wife of an individual, but the first lady of the house. Even Panini states that the word pati can be suffixed with the syllabus only when the wife takes part in a yagna. And so religious functions are be performed by both men and women. Another word for wife is bharya, one who must be fed and supported. So we find that during this period there is so much of a preference given to son, the daughters are not so much welcome. But yet, having said that, a daughter was encouraged, they were taught, though Again, if you read Altekar, and he says there is a lot of anxiety in families if they have daughters, because they have an anxiety to select a good son-in-law. They feel the pain of separation of a daughter. They are always anxious whether the marriage will be a happy or a sad one. Remarriage is not possible, and so they prefer that not to have daughters. But then the earlier, till the beginning of the Christian era, the Upanayana ceremony was common for girls also, and however, over a period of time it was given up. And we find that we have examples in the Rig Veda of Maitri. There are more than 1,000 hymns, and about 10 I credit to Maitri. She is seen as a seer and a philosopher. She contributed towards the advancement of her sage husband Yagnavalkya, his personality, and Yagnavalkya also imparted the doctrine of soul and his knowledge to his wife. Another very important name which we come across is Gargi, who was the Vedic prophetess and the daughter of the sage Vachaknu, and she has also composed various hymns. We find that she questions a lot of the scholars who are debating. In fact, we find that there were about 20 women who composed the hymns of the Rig Veda, and the duties of girls after she gets married are very clear, and marriage is the ultimate goal. This was regarded as a social and religious duty. In fact, there is a Vedic passage which says that a person who is unmarried is unholy. From the religious point of view, he remains incomplete and he is not fully eligible to participate in sacraments. So, marriage was something which was very important. A woman is seen as an Ardhangini. In many of the documents, she is also referred to as Shakti, because all male power comes from the feminine power, Shakti. So, you have these different images that come up at that time. In fact, there is a passage which from the Rig Veda in book 5, hymn 6, which talks about the concept of equality between man and women, which is there, and it says, the wife and husband, being the equal halves of a substance, are equal in every respect. Therefore, both should join and take equal parts in all the works, religious and secular. And even if you look at the Hindu gods, you always have Shiva with Shakti, Vishnu with Lakshmi, Ram with Sita, and they are always present, as a very important part. We do not come across any child marriage in the earlier period. There is no such harsh demand for dowry. Earlier, widows are allowed to marry. They could also inherit the property of their husband. We do not hear so much about sati at this time. There is no untouchability. But slowly, we find that these, practices develop over a period of time, and we find that there is a lot of references in the Ramayana and others where you have the Swayamvara Vivaha, where they also go in for love marriages at that time. By later Vedic period, you also have the dowry which is slowly coming in, because they are talking in terms of a bride price of a cow and bull, which is mentioned in many places, and it is slowly that all these things become very important. Polygamy is again something which was found only among the ruling sections of society. It was fairly common among king and nobles, and even the Vedic literature refers to various incidents of polygamy. And you had people like William Jones, H.T. Colebrook, who started, who were associated with the Asiatic Society, and they did not really mention about women. Passingly, Jones refers to Sati in the passing. He talks a little about Gargi. Colebrook gives a very textual reference to Sati. It was James Mill, who divided history into Hindu, Muslim and British India, and he felt that Hindu civilization was very crude because the way women were being treated. They were excluded from sacred texts, deprived of an education, they had no share in parental property. In fact, Catherine Mayo published her book Mother India. It became a bestseller in that period, and they were using it. It talks about the excesses and the terrible suffering of a child bride, and it became, this was used as a very good reason for not giving Swaraj to Indians. We have to understand that whatever these colonial writers are writing, they are only using Brahminical texts. It is not available to everyone. These are the views of the Brahmins as they are imagining the society, and they only are very much occupied with questions of marriage and the rituals. Chastity becomes very important. Chastity is a quality which is very much prized at this time, and therefore you only have these views of the Brahmins which are there, and Sanskrit was not easily available. So you cannot just say that what the Orientalists are saying is true about ancient India. We have all these different kinds of images. Women are seen as subordinate, there is a preference for son, no doubt, and there is a lot of importance given to the wife. In spite of all that, she is also seen as Shakti. In this lesson, I am going to look at women in medieval India. I have already shown you how it's a very patriarchal society in ancient India and what is the status of women. And the same thing continues in the medieval period also. And what we have done in history is there has been a neglect of gender as an analytical category, and it has had serious implications. We have, when we look at the medieval period, there are certain ill-founded notions about individual women and women as a group, and these have gone unchallenged, and they are often constantly reinforced with constant reiteration, and this is something which continues throughout the medieval period. Though you had a large number of movements at this time, which brought in a lot of women into the forefront. And if you look at the Bhakti movement, this was a period where they were demanding an equal society. They wanted everyone to be equal in the eyes of God. And you had a large number of women who became part of this movement, and you had Akka Mahadevi in 12th century. She was the daughter of a very rich merchant in Udutal in 12th century. She was a great devotee of Shiva, and she was known to be a very beautiful young woman, and the chieftain of the land, Kaushiki, fell in love with her and he wanted to marry her, and then she put up three promises in front of him that he would not touch her against his wishes. But when he does that, she leaves him and she walks out naked. Similarly, you had Lal Ded in Kashmir, during the 14th century. She was married at the age of 12 to another Brahmin family named Nika Bhatt. And then we have a number of legends which talk about the cruelty that was met out to her. And she also walks out naked. There are stories that, when she would dance, she would sing in a frenzy. And she came to be known as Lal Ded because the lower portion of her belly expanded to cover her private parts. Meera is a pan-Indian figure during 15th, 16th century. She is also, from Rajasthan. There were so many attempts at trying to murder her. They tried to kill her. Then you have another example of Sahajo Bai. She is born in 1765. And she also talks about her life as a woman. You have instances of Diwal Bai, Gauri Bai, who are, again from Gujarat. Then you have another saint called Ganga Sati, who is a poetess of Gujarat. So you have a large number of these women. In fact, from Maharashtra you have Jana Bai and Bahina Bai. So you have these women who had lot of difficulties after marriage. Their life was very smooth before they got married, but then after marriage they come into lot of issues with their in-laws family. There are attempts at trying to even kill them, because it is felt that the daughter-in-law brought a shame to these families. They get very restricted space in the matrimony, and what they did, they posited their relationship with God. They started looking upon God as their lover, their husband, their friend, and their mistress, as looking upon themselves as their mistress. And they created this space for themselves. In the religious field, they negotiated patriarchy in their own terms. And so, you have a very good example of many of these women in the Bhakti movement. But then when you come to the medieval period, look at the chronicles. When you have an individual woman like Razia Sultan, Minhajul Siraj in Tabqat-e Nasiri, he mentions about her. He says she is a wise and just, generous, a benefactor to her kingdom, a dispenser of justice, a protector of her subject, and a leader of her armies. She has all those qualities befitting a king, but she is not born of the right sex. So, being a woman was her biggest problem, and she was very capable. Iltutmish had nominated her as his successor because he saw his sons were good for nothing, and she had proved her worth and her capability as a military leader. And when she became the queen, she tried to offset the balance of the old amirs, and she had, she took the help of Yakut, who was an Abyssinian slave. And there are so many. Similarly, another very important woman which you have in medieval period is Nur Jahan. Many of the writings of this period represent her husband Jahangir as being effeminate or emasculated king. In fact, Vincent Smith goes to the extent of calling it a petticoat government, because she was the one who was trying to, as he says, she is power hungry and manipulative. Now, what is interesting, if you look at the sultans of medieval period, I am sure you will all know that all of them were manipulative. There were so many wars, each one was power hungry. But when it comes to a women, we raise all these kinds of questions. So, women's manipulation gets much more serious attention than that of men. That is how many of the contemporary historians have treated Nur Jahan. But then when the woman is taking care of her son, when she acts as a regent, then she is not seen as being so much threatening, and she is applauded. You have examples of Chand Bibi, Rani Lakshmi Bai, where they were trying to combine the heroic valor with the resistance against the imperial power, and they were trying to protect the role, the throne for their sons. And this is how these women are represented as being very noble women. So, we have really not moved away from the patriarchal setup of how we judge women in history, and medieval history is a very interesting case in point. When the woman is fighting for herself, she is looked upon as being hungry, manipulative. When the woman is fighting for a husband, the husband is ridiculed, saying that he is it's a petticoat government, he is an emasculated king. But when the woman is in the role of a mother, she is trying to fight for her son, that woman is applauded. In fact, the medieval period becomes a very good peg to hang all kinds of evils in society. Whether we are talking in terms of child marriage, parda, sati, infanticide, all these are attributed to medieval period. Many of the men were writing about the harem. When the men were not allowed into the harem, there were strict rules of privacy, and women were kept behind screens. So they used the imagination, and they start talking about, you know, each king having 300 wives and they are all staying in the harem. They did not, they looked upon the harem as a very sexualized space without realizing that the harem is nothing but a domestic space. See, today we have families. In the family there are so many people who live. Similarly, in the harem you had aunts, you had mothers, you had sisters who were there, and it is not necessarily a sexualized space. But then many of these males, when they are looking upon them, they describe the harem in terms of exorcism, promiscuousness, and so, you know, how we look upon women in history is something very important. We have really not moved away from those patriarchal notions of looking at women as a, you know, daughter, mother or wife, and they find it very uncomfortable to deal with women who are fighting for themselves and who are individual. Though we have so many examples, I gave you examples from the Bhakti movement where these women went out and, you know, tried to create a space for themselves. So, you know, the kind of gender construction continues right from ancient period to medieval period. Thank you very much.